Throughout history, queer culture has transformed and adapted countless times, and it can be understood that it evolves cyclically, growing into moments of visibility, acceptance, and large-scale influence, before often being pushed back underground into periods of suppression and erasure. The Harlem Renaissance, the Pansy craze, and the development of ballroom culture represent this idea. However, this cycle is not linear. Periods of suppression often occur alongside continuous adoption and widespread circulation of queer culture in the mainstream society. The Harlem Renaissance represents a significant period of intellectual and cultural production, where Harlem became the epicenter of black creativity, flourishing with the support of a network of black-owned businesses such as publishing houses and entertainment venues. A key figure in the movement was Alain Locke, whose 1925 anthology promoted racial pride and cultural self-definition, shaping the framework of the movement and, in turn, the historical viewpoint. Writers and musicians played a huge role in the expression of identity.
American poet, dramatist, novelist, lyricist, lecturer. He's here tonight to read poetry, his own poetry, to a jazz accompaniment. Introduction.
Sons of Saturn. This is what I'm gonna sing. Sons of Saturn. This is what I'm gonna sing. I feel the blues are coming. I wonder what the blues will bring.
Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston explored black identity through literature, while musicians such as Duke Ellington and Ma Rainey curated the sound.
All I do is dream all the time.
I thought you played piano.
No, this is not piano. This is dreaming.
Harlem also fostered a visible, though often discreet, queer presence.
I'd have neglected you, Gladys, but it isn't often we get a charming lad from Guatemala.
Ultimately contributing to an emerging queer culture. The Pansy craze and the Harlem Renaissance intersect in location and era. The craze emerged as a commercially popular and visible form of entertainment that gave queer performers visibility, particularly in urban centres such as Harlem and New York City. Originating in the early history of ball culture in Harlem, with the first ball being held in 1869, these events later evolved into large-scale spectacles by the 1920s. The evolution of the masquerade balls and similar events blurred racial boundaries, creating a space where queer identity and performance were the most important. The events also appealed to the white middle and upper class audiences that sought out spectacle and entertainment. These events became societal occasions.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to see our contestants? Let's open up the curtain and take a look at our beauties. Let's hear it for them.
Despite this visibility and acceptance, black performers were frequently discriminated against and judged unfairly, revealing that racial injustice was still present within these spaces. The Pansy craze was able to flourish and thrive during Prohibition. Nightlife was pushed underground into speakeasies, where the constraints of social norms were loosened and where queer performers, referred to at the time as pansies, were able to gain visibility. Performers such as Jean Mallon and Gladys Bentley became key figures within the scene.
Well, Broken Handsome, why don't you come up and see me sometime?
Using performance, humour and fashion to construct queer identity, but was still seen as a spectacle. For a brief period, queer culture was not only visible but also allowed to flourish in its own space. It was also commercially and culturally successful. However, this visibility was short-lived, with the end being marked by the Wall Street crash of 1929, which resulted in reduced financial support for the arts, while the repeal of Prohibition saw the closure of speakeasies, which removed the spaces for the queer community.
My privilege to deliver to you, with a compliment to Anheuser-Busch, the first case of Budweiser beer to be delivered in the state of New York. Happy days are here again.
This pushed queer performances out of public spaces, reducing visibility and pushing the culture back underground or forcing performers to find better work in more accepting countries and cities. However, still queer performance, style and humour continue to circulate within mainstream entertainment, demonstrating that suppression does not prevent cultural influence, but instead divides cultural production from its origin.
Now you want to talk about reading? Let's talk about reading.
The Great Depression and the end of the repeal of the Prohibition represent the decline of both the Harlem Renaissance and the Pansy craze. Ballroom culture developed from the Harlem Renaissance and the Pansy craze. It emerged as a response to both social and racial exclusion existing within queer spaces. Balls have existed since the late 19th century, but black performers were often excluded from recognition and judged unfairly.
You started it, but I know it started back in the 50s because I was little, and they used to have balls on 155th Street and 8th Avenue, and a ballroom where only a small minority of people would go once a year.
Once a year.
And they would have a ball for all the gay kids in the city that would come. And then it graduated, like they had one out in Long Island, where up in Harlem on 155th Street, there was like the blacks and the Spanish would go to Rockland Palace. They would have a ball once a year. And then out on and Daisy D, which was a big white queen, had the ball for the white queens way out in Long Island.
This led to the creation of ballroom as we know it today. This change was sparked by Crystal LaBeija, who challenged such racial injustices documented in The Queen, 1968.
Because you're not going to get it. And that's why all the true beauties didn't come.
It's in bad taste and you're showing your colors and stuff.
I am doing it bad, but I have a right to show my color, darling. I am beautiful, and I know I'm beautiful.
Crystal went on to co-found the House of LaBeija and the first black-led ball.
Legendary mother of the House of LaBeija. Not the founder. Crystal was the founder. I just rule it now.
This moment marked the beginning of the house system, which formalized chosen families within the ballroom community.
Ovenes, Pendarvis,
Adonis,
LaMay,
Pendarvis, Saint Laurent, of course.
Dupree.
These houses functioned as support systems for many within the community. They provided shelter, mentorship, and a sense of belonging, especially from individuals who had been rejected by their biological family.
And they decided, well, if you want to become an extravaganza, you have to walk a ball first, and if you snatch a trophy, then you become the extravaganza.
The houses also acted as competitive teams that played out within the balls and wider culture. The balls evolved into highly anticipated and organised competitions where participants would spend weeks preparing and would walk in a range of categories such as performance, fashion, and realness.
Next category, high fashion with the sportswear. The Poconos versus the Catskills.
Realness is the concept and ability to convincingly portray a role or identity. These categories came out of the struggles that African American, Latina, and queer people faced in mainstream society. Often declined opportunities based on appearance, sexuality, and race, so they played out and lived these fantasies within the balls. Voguing was birthed by the ballroom culture, attributed to Paris Dupree, who was said to have been in the street holding a copy of Vogue, throwing shade with another girl from the ballroom scene. Shade is a way of fighting through your words and has contributed to many different art forms within ballroom. Then Paris started posing like the models in Vogue. Then the other girl started doing the same, and it became this visual art form of throwing shade at another queen. Willie Ninja spread the art form of voguing internationally when he travelled to Japan to teach the dance. Madonna popularised the art form within mainstream society and pop culture. However, she did hire two dancers, Louis Extravaganza and Jose Extravaganza, from the ballroom community to choreograph the music video. Ballroom culture entered mainstream society through its sudden widespread visibility with the success of voguing, and the documentation of the inner community in Paris's burning.
I said men's garment. What are these?
He looked like he had on a man's fox coat.
Tell this child where are the men's garments. I paid for it, motherfucker. A man bought it. The button's on the right side. The judges say it. It buttons on the right side.
This evolved into contemporary drag culture as we know it today, particularly in shows such as RuPaul's Drag Race, where they make specific references to ballroom culture.
Darling. Because reading is what? Fundamental. That's right. That's right.
However, it is important to know that this exposure did not always result in full recognition. Ballroom culture represents the evolution of queer culture from the Harlem Renaissance and the Pansy craze, while also demonstrating the repeated historical patterns in which queer culture is simultaneously rejected and adopted, while evolving in a cycle of visibility and abandonment. Therefore, queer culture is not only cyclical in its visibility, but also in its appropriation as elements of culture repeatedly seep into and are absorbed by mainstream society, while the communities that originate them remain marginalized. Queer culture adapts and re-emerges while redefining itself continuously, showing that rather than disappearing, it evolves in response to the conditions imposed upon it. That was great.
Thank you so much.
Yay.